It's always interesting hitting the live button, the go live button. There's this 2 second period where it feels like going on stage, but we're live either ways, and it's wonderful to be on another episode of Everything Outside Code. And today we have a wonderful guest, Brian. I think first time we met Brian we met in person
Yeah,
was
Render
in
ATL maybe.
Ghana. Yeah,
Oh no, before that,
Render
I think
ATL.
I might have met you in San Francisco, like at the GitHub office, randomly as well.
I'm trying to remember if we met or I missed you because I spoke to Benedict at the time,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
there was a Moju Miller as well, but
Okay.
they
Yeah.
said you
Yeah.
were somewhere else. I
I
think
think
that's
I
when
might
we
have been on the East
connected.
Coast. Yeah. Yeah. I was actually. I
Yeah,
think I might have been traveling that day, but you did stop by, and I think I missed you.
yeah,
But we did meet definitely at Render ATL a couple years back.
yeah, yeah, definitely, and that was good. And thanks for coming on the stream today. And for anyone listening, I'm going to let Brian introduce himself in a bit, but today we're going to be talking about, I think, stuff around open source, what Brian is working on. And if you have any questions, just leave them in the comments. We'll see them. And while you're at it, if you're on YouTube, you could hit the subscribe button. It's somewhere below. I can't figure out where it is. So over to you, Brian. How's it going?
Yeah, going well. Yeah, so Brian Douglas, go by B Dougie on GitHub and other places on the internet. And yeah, I mean, most recently, I spent almost 5 years working at GitHub, leading developer advocacy and relations. And prior to that, I was early employee number 3 at Netlify. So came on board as an engineer, and eventually started doing more DevRel stuff as I was eventually transitioning to GitHub. But today, I run a company called Open Sauce, which we provide insights in open source projects, like really to engage developers, rally teams, but also highlight success stories through open source. And kind of got into this through me personally. I was a career switcher, did sales out of college, did that for about 4 years, was getting my MBA, and then taught myself how to write code because I wanted to build an app. And then when I found that really quickly, when you're teaching yourself, you're going to run into open source pretty quickly, especially nowadays. Like you can't Google something and not run into a library or a GitHub link. And I found out that open source was a gateway for me to level up quicker. So at the age of 27, I switched from sales to full-time engineering at startups in San Francisco. And it was a big jump, but I had a lot of mentorship and like unofficial mentorship through open source. And I'm trying to help other folks find that path as well.
That's amazing. I didn't know you worked at Netlify in the early days.
Yeah, it was pretty early. Started the Jamstack Radio podcast like 2 weeks after I joined. That podcast is now going 8 years long, still shipping episodes. And yeah, I've got a whole history about the Jamstack and all that stuff as well. But we can dig into that, or we can dig into open source. All the above is good.
Yeah, that's cool. So how did you go from GitHub to open source? And this was from I think that was in 2019. I remember you were still at GitHub, right? So
Yeah.
What was that transition like? And how did you decide to make the jump?
Yeah, so I mean, open source, I talk about more about the obsession of open source because I did that before GitHub. So while at Netlify, I was building app.netlify.com. So the dashboard, you see all your deploys and your sites and everything like that. With maintaining that, working with the designer, working with the other folks at the company to build that product. And I personally was a customer of the product. So the way they found me is because I was deploying my sites to Netlify. So my blog, my podcast, and eventually they reached out and said, "Hey, you should work here." So because I was like the ideal user of someone who builds a bunch of front end apps, deploys them for fun on the weekends, I did start doing some open source. And when I was doing open source, like changing docs, which now is like trivial, like your docs can get deployed almost anywhere now at this point. But I think the standard was GitHub Pages at that point. So I would open up a deploy preview, like just a quick little link, and say, "Hey, I updated the docs." And it was always intentional. It was not like me looking for white space changes or spelling mistakes. It was actually, I made some change to the library. Here's a docs update. Here's a link to Netlify. Full disclosure, I worked there, but like, check it out. And like, there was a correlation of, and mind you, I did sales prior to full-time engineering. So I wasn't trying to sell anybody anything. I was just trying to get the awareness out there because I loved the product I worked on. So I got to the point where I had like 20 PRs open across multiple projects of things I was just touching and things I saw opportunity to fix. And at the time, this was like 2016, 2017, like open source React like was getting bigger and bigger. There were some edge cases that weren't covered and things like React Native. So I was just helping out by just, hey, let me just push this along and like share what I found. So I created this like CRM tool to manage all the PRs I had open and all these multiple libraries and projects. Because I wanted to like check up and be like, hey, a thing's still open, or hey, let me know if there's anything else I can do. And the date that would tick down, be like, oh yeah, 7 days it's been since the last like touch. Let me ping them again. And nothing automated. Just had a list of PRs and stuff that I wanted to also contribute to in the future. And I bought this domain to attach to this little React app I built called OpenSauce. So OpenSauce.pizza was a domain I purchased back in 2017. And I built this all on the GitHub GraphQL API. So GitHub GraphQL had just came out the year prior. I wanted to test it out and try it out with something. And the idea I had at the time, the problem I had to solve was this. I had a lot of PRs to manage at one time that weren't in my organization or my repos. So then I spoke in 2017 at GitHub Universe about this product that I built for fun. And then from that talk, GitHub invited me to work at GitHub. So like that's how I got to GitHub, was because the original idea of OpenSauce. Fast forward a couple years in, pandemic hits 2020, and I wanted to build something on Twitch live streaming. And I had this project that I built, which is OpenSauce. So I started this live streaming, fixing issues, like building a kind of an awareness and a community around it. To eventually, like, we had a bunch of ideas in the community and Discord that we ended up starting to build like other features into the application. And then fast forward to like 2022, we ended up building Hot OpenSauce.pizza, which is like a discovery engine for projects to contribute to. And we built this, go into details, but it's built on a bunch of code and like scraping GitHub and stuff like that through GitHub Actions. It was like a behemoth of a web scraper. But what I'm getting at is like, at that point, I was like, okay, we had, I think 250 people had signed up who were actively hanging out in our Discord, leveraging this little side project for myself. So then I wanted to pursue, like, what would it look like if I actually worked on this full time? So OpenSauce today is what we're working on full time, which is now not just finding projects to contribute to, but like, what if the maintainers could validate insights and who's contributing and where they're coming from? But then like, there's a ton of maintainers that take sponsorship. Like, how do they validate the sponsorship they take? Like, what does that turn into? Does it turn into more contribution? Does it turn into more releases? And that's a hard question to answer because no one has a product to serve that data. And that's what OpenSauce is going to be.
Wow. That sounds like actually going from 0 to 100 with a problem that you experienced and now you're solving it for others. But first, I'm curious, did you ever think of changing the domain name OpenSauce.pizza to something else for SEO reasons or for?
Well, I mean, we own the SEO right now for OpenSauce. So there's a large conference called OpenSauce.live that happens in San Francisco. And they boost our SEO from that conference every year. So it's the second year they're going to be doing it this year, I think in June or July. But because I've been going so long and steady, and like we had a dev 2, we've got a blog, we've got a product, we got a community that also blog about our product. So like SEO reasons, like it'd be silly for us to change the name. We do own OpenSauce.com. So if you want to go OpenSauce.com, like it redirects to OpenSauce.pizza. But the .pizza really fits within our ethos and our brand. And I think what I'm learning really quickly, so like I have a bunch of alternatives that we were planning on if we needed to switch to a different name that was a little more professional and buttoned up. But in testing with customers and testing with like investors, because we took investment as well last year, like there's no concern about the name or having a .pizza name. Because at the end of the day, it's like if you're providing value to an end user, to a customer, it doesn't matter what the name is, as long as it's not offensive.
Yeah, that's right. So I guess once you provide value, because I'm sure a lot of folks have like a similar challenge and they're unsure what to do. A lot of side projects that started from the .fyi or .me domain, and they're like, oh, this is going to be big. What do we do? Do we go through like a rebrand or like what exactly do they do? So it seems like once you create value, and did you intentionally build all the SEO juice around OpenSauce.pizza with the conference, the blog? Were these like all intentional, or these were just like they just happened?
Yeah, I'd be more it just happened because honestly, I think so. And like this is, I come from a place where like if it's good enough, people will start using it. And like I don't have a problem talking about what I'm doing. So if
Hmm.
something catches on, like there'll be a bit of a following. So like if we spent time of like looking for keywords and like writing blog posts for that and stuff, like yes, that would work. But then like we wouldn't be building a product that had provided value. So I try not to be distracted by okay the domain name, SEO.
Hmm.
Like we honestly like we're not even really legit for SEO. Like we're only just now like exploring server components in our React app,
Yeah,
and like we're missing a lot of opportunity at that. But like, does that matter? Because like we now have at this point almost 8,000 folks who have signed up to this product, and I'd say at real numbers, 1,800 are weekly active users. So we have a high percentage of folks who come back and click through open
yeah.
source and check things out because the data changes every day because it's all contribution
Hmm.
data. Um, so that's a number that I'm happy and proud of. We can 10x
Yeah,
that number easy if we double down on SEO. But like my goal right now is provide value, build a quality product, and like worrying about SEO and keywords and domain names at this
yeah,
stage of our company is only distracting from what the actual goal is, which is build a product that people love and get value from.
yeah. True. And it's interesting to hear that because with 8,000 users and almost 2,000 weekly active users, anyone would think, yeah, you want to build like a proper like brand, like start thinking about, the overall branding and domains and going through all the
Yeah.
distracting stuff. But
Yeah.
yeah.
And it's the, I stand on this like notion of sometimes you got to throw out the first idea. And if it's bad, you'll change
Mhm.
it. So like
Yeah.
OpenSauce.pizza was like, okay, first thing, let's go with that. And no company, just me, side project. But then
Yeah.
as we were exploring, like, okay, what was the thing that it should turn into? Like, what are the other sort of button up names? Should it be like
Hmm.
Get Helper or Get Guide or Get whatever? And like, there's like a bunch of other names that I'm sitting on that could be what open source turns into. But I think what we have now is we have organically built a brand that's
Hmm.
noticeable or recognizable. And I think we'd be doing a disservice to the community who's already built goodwill with us to change it today.
Yeah.
So like changing our brand really would have to come from like we're either changing directions, building a different product,
Yeah.
but the product we're building is open source, and like we're going to continue to use that name until that changes.
That's cool. Just going a bit back to your origin story, and you come from like a sales background with an MBA, and then there's a crossover to engineering. It feels like what I mean. Most of the engineers I've spoken to now that are founders, they want to do a lot more sales. They wish they have like sales experience, myself included. If there was something I
Yeah.
should learn 6 months ago, it would have been sales. So do you feel like that, all that knowledge and the skills from, the sales side of things, they currently help you like do a better job, be a better founder and better creator?
Yeah, I mean, so like this is something that when you go into YC, they ask for like who your co-founders are, and I explored the idea of having co-founders and shipping this originally. It didn't work out. We had a 3-month trial period. Co-founder decided to bow out, so instead I have a founding team. So when I a couple years ago, and like it's kind of getting real, but I had to think, okay, should I go search to find other folks to split this company up evenly and share that vision, or should I just lean on my past personal experiences of doing sales, doing engineering, doing DevRel, like also touching marketing and different aspects? And I would say like being a founder, you kind of have to have the hubris. I'm actually pretty introverted. I do a lot of podcasts and I show up and do talks and stuff like that. But I've learned how to do it. And the reason I've learned how to do it because I did sales out of college, and I did sales out of college is because I knew that was the way I could make the most amount of money with my college degree. So I learned how to talk, pick up the phone. Like 10 years ago when I was doing sales out of college, you had a phone and you had to call. There's no this email thing where you go back and forth and send like 100 emails. You had to call
Yeah.
100 people. So I learned how to talk on the phone. And the one thing that helped me to like learn this is this one book, which is called How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's an old book. It's like it's now at this point over 100 years old. It's not like I wouldn't treat it like the Bible because like not everything in it is like valid today. But just by understanding like how to talk to somebody. So like for example, doing a podcast is one of the best way to do sales, because you invite somebody who's your future customer, you ask them questions about themselves. And like in that book, if you get them to talk about yourselves, you already won. So you ask me questions and you ask me more stuff about my business and you understand like, okay, what's our game plan? And like Hack Mamba, if you're all doing consulting for developer content and you're like digging into our SEO and what's important to us. And then in this conversation, you figure out, okay, Brian doesn't care about SEO, but he cares about building quality products and building a quality community. So like if we can help, like you pitched me, but like this is what we exactly did. Like first thing we did when I started Open Sauce, and I say we because I brought on a founding team. So Chris and then Brandon came on like pretty shortly after Chris. And we did not take salaries. We bought cameras and we started a podcast called The Secret Sauce. And the reason why we bought cameras and we did The Secret Sauce is because the quality of podcasts, like this is in StreamYard, but the majority of podcasts happen like in StreamYard, Zoom, Riverside, remotely. And the beauty of this is like you could do this anywhere, anybody around the world. All you have to do is like stay up late or wake up early. But like when you bring someone into a studio and you record, it's a different experience. Like they're prepared differently. Yeah. Like I can open up a laptop while we're sort of working on sound and like testing and be like, hey, can I show you a quick demo? And every single person who's been on The Secret Sauce is our future customer. And that's the thesis we went in with is like, why don't we build a product where we can ask people what they want before we start writing any code? So May of 2022, we invited like first 3 guests and we pitched the idea of like, hey, it would be cool to see this data. Like, what's the secret sauce for your success at open source? All open source founders, tell us your secret sauce. And they would share with us. And like, wouldn't it be cool if you could like show the track record of how you got to this point? Or every time you do a board meeting or you do a pitch for a VC, you include data that's grounded in like some facts that how you got to this point. Because at the moment, everyone does GitHub stars. So like, oh, we got 10,000 GitHub stars. We have 70,000 GitHub stars. We have 100,000 GitHub stars. But what does that mean? Like, what does stars mean? But no one knows. They just know stars are the metric of people have interest and they've saved this project for later. But like, what's the start of PR pipeline? What's the start of download pipeline? No one knows. Like, no one's actually building that pipeline or those insights in the data. So zooming back, like when you asked a question about like, does my skill or my background, does it help lean into like, of course, like it does leans into founding a company. But I think the difference is that we started the company not by shipping a bunch of code. We already had a bunch of code. We started by asking questions of folks who would potentially purchase a product, not knowing what product would be, but we had to ask the question first. And from my understanding and reading books and talking to other founders, because we now talked to about 40 different founders on The Secret Sauce. Everyone wishes they did this first, but everyone starts with building a product and then go shop that around.
Yeah. That's right. I think that's something folks have to learn maybe second time of founding a product. It's usually not the first time. The first time they build stuff, and then the second time they think about distribution first before actually building the product. That's amazing. So how do you figure out commercial viability for this? Right. So you mentioned that you raised money. I'm just curious, right?
Yeah. So
is that something you've thought of even?
Yeah. And this is something that like we've been pretty hand wavy on even our website about like what the actual product is, because we've been building this product because I truly believe no one's building what we're building. So like to answer your question quickly, I worked at a company called GitHub, got purchased for $7.5 billion by Microsoft. I watched them build different products. My job was to meet every open source maintainer, top 100 projects. So like even if I asked you what the top 100 projects in GitHub is, like you probably would guess at probably the top 10. You probably get a lot of them wrong. But like, what is top? If we go by stars, that's easy, cool. But like, is Free Code Camp the top GitHub project? Like, it's definitely for community adoption, driving folks to GitHub, leveraging and building stuff around JavaScript, TypeScript, which is how their product's built. But also teaching a huge community of like millions of developers worldwide. Okay, maybe. But what about 99CU? Which is literally a markdown farm with a bunch of PDFs. Like that's one of the top 10 projects on GitHub.
Wow.
Maintained by folks based in China. Like, do we need to reach out to them and sell them more GitHub? Or do we need to sell them VC money? No. So like we have a metric to identify top 100 projects based on activity and engagement across all of GitHub. And so that starts, okay, that's interesting, but no one has this knowledge. And like, this is the product we're building. So I already forgot what the original question was, but basically what I'm getting at is like, I have insider knowledge from working at GitHub and building a product that GitHub should be building. But GitHub's not building this today because they're building AI into their product today. So like Copilot Chat, like it's not, I mean, they had a whole GitHub universe about, hey, the entire company's refounded on AI. So for that, or refounded on Copilot. So if that's the focus, I've got something that's going to be a best, like if you're looking for more data to attach to Copilot, I'm building a product that's going to be very, very like complementary to that.
Yeah. Are you hiring? I can shamelessly cook and clean. I can
yeah.
you guys.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're not hiring right now, and I think we definitely got a great job of hiring like really, really high quality staff members.
Yeah.
We're mostly engineering at the moment, and we've got some really good folks like helping us go to market and design and marketing. But yeah, today we're a team of 8, and like we're really hyper focused on commercial viability and like proving that there is this revenue that can be made from the product that we're actually shipping this week. So
great. You're shipping something this week.
Yeah.
I guess we should all look forward to that then. Anyone that's listening.
OpenSauce.pizza/blog or changelog. Check it out.
Yep. That's cool. I remember first time you told me about open source in Atlanta. I thought it was like mind blowing because GitHub is where developers hang out, but also I started to think maybe data driven. I know almost nothing about GitHub projects and what goes on there. I just know there are like projects of the week and projects of like the month. And there are stars, how they're calculated, what happens. I have absolutely no idea. So I think it's an amazing product, and I haven't seen anything like it. I've seen products that sort of, they're like platforms where you can manage your open source project. It's like you onboard your open source projects here. You can manage like maintainers and stuff. But is it something that looks at like the ecosystem as a whole? Which is why I think open source is really unique. So looking at your role currently, what you do with the team. So you have like a founding team. I assume you still have like, it's still a founding team. What do you contribute to? Engineering, overall leadership?
Sales? Yeah. I mean, my main goal right now is sales. So like everything I do in conversations, and like I've always approached sales of like before I left, I worked at a company called Tech Data. We wholesaled a bunch of like networking equipment for large stadiums. So like NFL was like one of the last deals I did. So Tennessee Titans was like literally the last stadium that we retrofitted with Wi-Fi. So in 2013, like Wi-Fi is everywhere now, but at this point now, 11 years ago, like Wi-Fi wasn't as synonymous as it was before. So NFL had a deal with all owners to put Wi-Fi in all stadiums, and they got Extreme Networks to be installed everywhere. So like huge multi-million-dollar deal, great bonus at that time. But that was like the last thing I did. But like what I was getting at, like the way I discovered that deal was the guy, I had the sales guy that we said this shoot the breeze with, talk about the Eagles, the football team, NFL team in the Eagles in Philadelphia. And I was asking about the Eagles and how they were doing. And I know how they're doing. I watch football, but like he's a fan. And he had mentioned in passing, oh yeah, we got this huge deal with the Eagles doing Wi-Fi in the stadium. I was like, oh yeah, tell me more about this. And he's like, oh yeah, huge multi-million-dollar deal. And yeah, it's for every 32 teams across the entire NFL. And the Eagles is like the third one in the list. And they're like, this is going to hit every single one of these stadiums. Like, oh, cool. Good to know. Hang up, talk to my boss. I'm like, hey, turns out there's a huge deal in the NFL we should be a part of. Let's see how we can get in this. And that's literally, it's like when you become friends with the potential customer. And like, I truly think relationships is where it's at. So like, again, podcast is like one of the best ways to like build a pipeline for sales because you just build relationships. And if like they don't want to buy, that's fine. But they probably have friends that are going to buy, or they have problems that they would like to get solved, and like eventually solve a problem that's worth the money for them to pay for. So like $25 a month, if this problem solved, yes or no? If it's a no, then cool. Like we'll figure out something else. I'll move on, like continue having conversation with other people, but we don't have to stop talking because you don't buy.
Mhm.
Or you come back on the podcast and we show you another demo when the camera's off. So my day to day, sorry to answer your question, my day to day is basically I run a podcast. I have like design partner meetings, which we have a few future customers who were just like showing new updates and getting direct feedback on like what the product
Mhm.
that they would purchase, like eventually pay for, what that's going to look like. And then at this point visionary. So like I've got a bunch of ideas. We've had a lot of feedback from these conversations. And I do a bit of product work to basically just like set up a backlog to help with the designer to also like turn out some designs based on some concepts that we're trying to explore. And then we have like an immediate roadmap, and then we have a forward-thinking roadmap of like what else we can
Yeah.
do and pull from to work on now. And that's pretty much day to day. And like I've got one of my first employees runs a podcast, also runs operations. So every now and then I'll jump into like a finance meeting. Right after this, we have a finance meeting. They'll just like go through numbers to
Yeah.
find out how everything looks. But yeah, just mainly just like running the business. And I don't do a lot of engineering at this point because we now have 4 engineers. So if I were to inject myself in the writing code,
Yeah.
I'm either slowing people down. So if I do write any code, it's always side project or research and development. So the only code I write really is SQL. It's not even code, but I'm looking at our data and discovering, like doing data science on the data we have. So there's like interesting signals that I'm discovering by this. Like we now have, so we had 7 terabytes of data. We actually, that was like that going back to 2014, all GitHub contributions. We now in app, it's like 1.7 terabytes, which is only the last 12 months. So we discovered really quickly that folks don't want to go that far back. If they do, that's
Mhm.
probably an enterprise contract, but 12 months is
Yeah.
enough for most folks. So let me know if you're listening to this and like you need more than 12 months of data. Like would love to get you on like a nice sweet deal with us. But yeah, so basically going through data, finding out like discovering some cool things, writing a blog post on stuff I'm discovering, and then like reaching out to folks to have conversations. Like that's my currently day to day.
Yeah. Was this like a conscious decision you made at some point, or is it just like a natural progression? You figured, okay, you're just going to slowly take like a step back, or one day you were like, oh, you're probably clogging the wheel for some folks. How did that happen?
Yeah, no, it wasn't even like that. It was I quit my role. So I quit my role in September 2022 at GitHub. But in June of 2022, when we actually met in person at Render ATL, I went on a
Yeah.
3-month sabbatical. And the reason for that is like I'd been on GitHub long enough, and the worst thing I could have did is like shut off my email, and all that knowledge is now just like hitting a redirect or hitting this email is no longer valid. So went on sabbatical for 3 months. That 3-month time, 2 of the 3 months, I was helping ship code. We were building the original version of the product. And at that point, like once the product was built, then I wanted to go and talk to folks to find out, okay, who's going to pay for this? Who's going to use it? So that's when I brought on Brandon to lead engineering for open source.
Mhm.
So at that point is when I removed myself from day-to-day engineering, and like I would just code review and fix small bugs because I knew if I kept myself in the system of writing code dependent on me, but then I'll have to jump on a plane to go to speak at a conference or go do something else. Everyone's still waiting for me to like ship the stuff that I should be shipping. And if I'm
Yeah.
now focused on shipping code and like skipping meetings that I could also discover, like, okay, sales conversations, then shipping code is not going to keep the business alive. Having conversations about who's going to purchase the company, like who's going to buy our product, is going to be way more valuable. So at that point, as soon as I quit my role and hired Brandon, that's when I stopped writing code full time.
That makes sense. I guess looking for like what's the highest value you could deliver to the organization.
Yeah,
That's sort of like what matters at any given time.
yeah, and I think what for technical founders, I think we can really lean on our coding ability and skills because, like, oh yeah, we know how to do this. Oh, I can do a React component real quick. I can whip something up real fast. But like those are skills that are replaceable. Like you could hire for an engineer pretty easily, but can you hire to sell your product pretty easily? Probably not, because like all the knowledge of why this product exists and why it should hit to the next level or like scale, that all lives with you. So if you're dependent on someone else to come in and learn all that stuff that like for years I'd worked at GitHub, for years I worked at Netlify, I did sales. all that knowledge, it sits with me. So like I can't bring on somebody else and train them to go learn 10 years of my experience. Instead, it's best for me to like set up the game plan for sales and like trust engineers to ship what they need to ship.
Yeah, that definitely does make sense. So something just came to mind now. With open source projects, my first entrance to open source was, a project that's completely free. It has like sponsors and folks that are um, just backing them, but mostly just sponsors, and they're really large, right? But then I start to see like open source projects with like pricing level, and these are priced in from like day one of writing the first line of code. They already know they're going to have like a pricing page, and they're going to sell a cloud version of this. So I wanted to know, like, what's your take on this? Is this like a natural progression of how open source tools or open source creators should be incentivized for, the code and the for their work in general?
Yeah, I mean, this is a longer conversation and it's a loaded question, but like this is something I was noticing at GitHub because we were doing streams like this called Open Source Friday with open source maintainers
Hmm.
talking about their projects. And there was like a trend of more open source maintainers who were like VC backed or had a paid offering. That if we brought them on to Open Source Friday, like we were now like basically king making. Like we give them a platform to then now you have 20,000 viewers and listeners and subscribers that at this point is 300,000, but like you have a bunch of people are now aware of your product. Like we're now like again like podcasts are one of the best places to like drive a
Yeah.
pipeline for sales, either for the person, the host, or the guest. And I think a lot of growth hackers get this. So I think some projects that like you come out the gate and you have a hosted version. Like I use a project that was like on GitHub sponsored called like Tailwind. They had like a Tailwind dev tools where you could open up
Hmm.
a console and it would spell out your Tailwind classes and like help you edit it and like do a bunch of like introspection on your Tailwind classes. Cool project. In order to get access to that product, you had to pay $5 a month in GitHub sponsors minimum, and then you get access to product. Like great idea. Eventually, I canceled it because I don't think I was getting $5 worth of value because I wasn't building. Like I'd go build a project on stream and need that for
Yeah.
like maybe a couple weeks, but then I go months without ever using it. So like the value wasn't really like basically what I'm getting at is like I think if you think of the sense of like growth hacking, like open source becomes a really good signal or a really good platform to help like growth hack your $5 a month or buy you a coffee. If you're trying to build a full on project that has a cloud offering, like you got to have cloud offering type level of like communication, customer support, feedback, consistent updates. So like if you're truly
Hmm.
out to build a business, like build a business. If you're looking to have a side project that makes you some income, like I think the clarity of that helps. And I'm seeing a lot of folks trying to do both or not knowing what they're like going out to do. And it becomes very confusing. So there's like the huge trend right now of a bunch of open source projects taking VC funding. And these are like usually projects in like the database world or infrastructure layer. And like these folks are getting a lot of funding and getting like they're already living off nothing. So now you get VC funding and then you pay yourself a little bit more than nothing. Now you can build this thing to like whenever you feel like you want to stop or when you want to get an exit and have this thing acquired or potentially IPO. Like that will take a little longer, but yeah. So anyway, like I think the world of like funding and open source and like making sustainable businesses, it's still evolving. And I saw a great
Hmm.
conversation with Kara Souls from GitHub talk about like the state of funding in open source. So she gave this at a FOSDEM, and then she also did this in she'll probably give this talk multiple places. I think it was kind of like the earliest version of her talk, but I imagine it will evolve. Uh, but there's like there's like a
Yeah.
bunch of opportunities on how you can get funded. So my recommendation for anybody else who's like thinking, oh, I want to do an open source project and make money off of it, I'd probably say slow down because like not every project is worth making money from. But if you have a business plan and a clear, like no one likes to bait and switch. So like if you're like, hey, this is open source and like use it and start the repo and like try it out and like perhaps give a donation, like that feels better. But if like, oh yeah,
Hmm.
use it, try it out, and then also once use this twice. Now you have to pay us $100. Like that becomes like kind of, it feels icky. But if you're upfront about this, like I think people can deal with that, or they'll give you feedback on
Yeah.
this is not going to work for them. Like my $5 a month for that Tailwind project. So yeah, there's a huge trend on like where the state of funding is going, and I think it's less about donation, give me $5 for coffee or GitHub sponsors, and I think we're seeing a lot more viable business really think through. Okay, let's take this seriously and see how far this goes, like as a serious idea.
Yeah, because I mean, it's not wrong. I'm just thinking of like it's not illegal. I'm just thinking of the morality of it, right? Where it's like this is an open source project. It's got like a lot of community following, and then along the way, the team is like, hey, we're going to take like a ton of funding from VC. We're going to build a cool product, but now you have to pay for it. Maybe they leave like a base version that's free, but then the paid version comes with like a lot of other capabilities. So like the core value proposition of the app is now behind a paywall, right? So I just start thinking,
well, so I think that would be a bad business model for anybody to approach. I think there's like, so something like Superbase is a good example. Like their entire product is self-hosted free. Like you could do it yourself. The challenge is like, I'm not a database expert. So for me to self-host my own Superbase, like I'm not doing it. Like we do it today at OpenSauce. Today at OpenSauce, we're self-hosted Superbase on DigitalOcean. So we're paying DigitalOcean instead of Superbase. But like we get a nice experience and a product from Superbase, and we get the support of open source and examples and a bunch of blog posts in a community to like unblock us when we're like, oh wait, how does this work? Okay, maybe there's a blog post or a documentation for this, and then other folks are so like there's a path there. But like if you're just looking for a plug and play solution and using open source as like your plug and play experience, like I think that we're seeing a transition in open source. Yes, there's funding, but also a transition of the approachability of open source. So like now if you've graduated boot camp, you can also use open source. Like you don't need to like 10 years of experience. Like you can now, like everyone has a README, everyone has like some cleared guides and documentation. So like the barrier of entry to use open source is lower. So then the barrier of entry for folks to contribute to open source is higher. So like I can't just go drop a PR in the Superbase. I gotta like go learn and find out like what a historical record is. It's open source, but like, is it approachable for me to make a contribution? Superbase is not a good example because like it is actually pretty approachable to make a contribution. But there are some projects that are not by design. It's more of like no support. Like no one in the community said, hey, this is actually hard to like work with. Can I improve the situation here? Like when that happens, then everyone benefits, but not everyone has the bandwidth or has the sort of awareness to do that. So, and I'll zoom back out because like this is kind of leading into like the reason I even like decided to leave GitHub to work in open source, which is I wanted to make more like open source obtainable and approachable for anybody. And the number one thing that we want to do with open source is like if you walk into a project, you should be able to answer the question, can I contribute here? Or do I know anybody who also contributed here? Or who do I talk to if I want to make a contribution? And a lot of that's pretty opaque when you look at GitHub. Like you can look at the contributors tab, but it's not always this case where the maintainers or the folks who are decision makers are also the top contributors. Because eventually, as any project, like you still either you contribute a bunch and that's your focus, or you try to grow a community and that's your focus, or you get distracted into like whatever the cloud hosted or business behind this is. So, like if you answer the question of like this repo, is this a good neighborhood for me to hang out in? Like yes or no. And whether it's a good neighborhood or a place that I can participate, is there a community I can hang out with? Like answer that question as fast as possible. And that's what we're trying to do with open source because like, again, if it's like an opaque onboarding experience, if like there's self-hosting opportunity that's free, doesn't quite have instructions, then the default is like, okay, well then let's just pay for this thing. It happens to be open source, so I can open an issue if I have like a customer support need. But like the barrier of entry can be shortened just by just some clear awareness. So I don't fault any company or any maintainer or any sort of growth hacker trying to do open source and then trying to build a business after the fact. I think it's all going to always be muddy. It's all going to be like we're going to learn as we go along. And I think we're going to see this like 30 years ago, like having VCs back open source software was like unthinkable. Almost having VCs back almost any software is unthinkable. Like this wasn't as common even 30 years ago. But now it's way more common. And I think where VCs can make a bet on like some random database tooling infrastructure play that's open source to eventually make that in a viable business, like that pathway has been proven multiple times over and over and over again,
Yeah.
that you're going to see more and more like institutional funding and viable businesses built out of open source. And now we just need like some sort of Rolodex or Oracle to find out, okay, what am I getting myself into? And that's open source.
Yeah. That makes sense. How do you see maintainers being incentivized when there's like VC money at play? So there's the open source part. There's like a lot of maintainers that are doing this for free out of like, you know, the goodness of their hearts. And but there's a company behind the product, right? That's like, you know, well paid with like good structure. So what's like an ethical approach to this?
Yeah, I mean, there's you kind of break out like, and then someone can correct me in the comments and stuff like that in the future, but there's like a company that wants to grow adoption and get lots of interest and like awareness on their product. And I think a lot of open source does better when it's like, it's not about how much money you make, it's about how many people are using it and how much feedback you can get and how better of a product you'll have by just having share usage. But then there's like, okay, we're going to build a paid product. As soon as we take VC money, we're going to try to turn like a profitable business. And most VC-backed companies, like you don't need to be profitable within the first year or the first 2 years.
Yeah.
You want to build a viable business that could potentially be profitable eventually. And this is why most IPOs take 10 plus years to happen. Because you got to figure out a bunch of stuff and figure out like, how do you build something that starts this and then becomes this and eventually becomes bigger. And like you can start with like just wrapping SQLite as a product to like host in the cloud. And then SQLite turns into like authentication inside of a database with SQLite. And then it turns into like, how do you manage caching with SQLite and authentication? And then it becomes like this big old platform that also takes in plugins and tools from SQLite. So I would say like, I think most folks would probably do better if you just focus on adoption and awareness, and like assume that eventually your value that you're building a strong community that is aware of your product will then turn into, okay, now we have a cloud offering eventually. And I think that's honestly, that's kind of worked out with most open source VC backed companies, is like cloud offering comes later. I think Appright was one of the examples that just recently announced their pricing, but for the past, like since 2021, 2020, it's been a free product that you can also self-host, but they have a cloud version today. But it took them a few years to get enough feedback to find out, okay, what is the actual product that we're selling? And I think VC funding gives you an extension of runway and time to like focus on that problem full time.
Yeah, that's right. Is open source open source?
It is. Yeah, so the majority of what we do is open source. I think the one thing that we have closed source is our time series database. And that's mainly because like that's our secret sauce on how we're able to get data back for years.
Yeah, that does make sense. So when you approach customers, right, what do you like prospects? What do you say to them is the thing they get out of open source? So what is the one sentence, hey, here's the benefit, or here's a problem you have, and here's a solution we're offering you?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be easy to have like the one liner of like, this is what you're buying. But today I ask some questions like, what's success in open source for you? Because that helps dictate like what's actually important. Because like what our product can do is a lot of things. But if like the success for them is getting more stars, we could show them something else that's not just stars. So like what stars in forks? So like there's a strong correlation between stars and forks. So like let's show you forks. Let's show you where these forks are going. So if any company represents those forks, so like I'm an engineer at Netflix and I forked your project, there's probably a conversation of like, oh, wow, what's Netflix doing with our product? Maybe it's nothing, but at least you have the information to know what's next. So like I usually ask, and the talks I've been giving at conferences lately has been like, what is success in open source? Let me show you some success. Freudian slip. But yeah, showing success. And like the last talk I gave in London was about, okay, stars to PR. So if stars is a metric that everyone chooses to be marketing and chooses to be like VC funding, what's interesting about that is like, okay, stars doesn't show success. It just shows awareness. But
Yeah.
eventually you can start seeing, okay, if stars correlate to forks, forks correlate to new contributors correlate to companies. There is now a correlation of like, there's interest at these companies with your project, whether it's like someone actually using it for that company or for a side project. You now have somebody inside who knows your product, and potentially, if you do a podcast, if you do blog posts, like there's a story to be told. So like, probably reach out to these people. So like that's the easiest thing that we're currently focused on right now. But
Yeah.
there's a lot of large organizations called open source program offices that that live within like the FANGs and these large enterprises. They're all paid based on how well open source is doing. So if open source is doing bad or good, like how can they tell? And the way to tell this is by actually seeing the data and providing actual reporting to justify their roles at these companies. So like those are the two things that we've been focused on as of recent.
That's that's cool. Could you give us like a sneak peek of what's coming?
Yeah, I mean,
not to dilute your product release, but something folks could be excited about and look forward to. Maybe a hint is fine.
Yeah, so I could show you a quick design, which I realized I thought I had this open, but let me. I think I could share screen, right?
Yeah, you can. I'll just add it to the stage.
All right. So this is what we're actually working on. So this is actually the culminate. This is what I talked about 2 weeks ago in London. But today you have GitHub repos and you have GitHub organizations, but you can't see like Microsoft has an organization called Microsoft, but they also have an organization called .NET, and they also have an organization called something else. And a lot of these enterprises have like 16, 30 plus of these organizations that they can't get eyes into what's happening across organizations. So what we're building right now is what I sort of hinted at, is we're calling workspaces. So workspaces is if you started higher, you can see multiple organizations worth of data. So then if you're looking at a cross organization, like what's the overlap of top contributors? And the talk I was giving previously was about unconventional metrics in open source. So new contributors is actually strongly correlated to forks, and forks are strongly correlated to stars. And this is what I was talking about, like my day-to-day, like I'm doing data science on our data. But then what's crossed out here, because I was actually going through this talk, rate of self-selection is like outside contribution. So if you start saying, okay, anybody who's contributing outside and they're a new contributor and they represent a company that's not my company, I should probably talk to them. And then other stuff that we actually were figuring out is like things like issues. Everyone looks at PRs as the metric of like contributions, but the easier thing is to comment on an issue. So like start counting how many outside contributors that are not in your organization are now commenting on issues. And you have a good idea of like what is engagement and what is traction for your open source project. So if you have to go to your board, go to your sponsors, your open collective, and report back on how success looks like in your open source project, we now have a place to provide that. Where 5 minutes a week, you can open up this workspace and you can get feedback really quickly on like how well open source is doing across your organizations. So that's what this is. And all these little metrics are things that we're working on actively right now that will go live for design partners pretty soon.
This is amazing. I think every open source project out there should have this. If they don't have this, I can already see ways they're missing out on valuable data. And also the efficiency with collecting all this information and sharing it with their board and even like internal stakeholders. This just makes it a breeze. That's it.
Yeah. It's and this is, again, this was a year of running a podcast, talking to our future customers, finding out what success is for them, and now putting this into a product. So like you could potentially do this without us. To be quite frank, like you can get access to the data. It's going to take a lot of work. What we're trying to do is make sure that like every company that we talk to has open source built internally. The challenge is that person that built that left 5 years ago. So like it's straightforward to like go figure out how to find this data and source it, but it's not easy to like maintain this as a business problem that will stay funded to perpetuity. So like when that person leaves to work on a different project, like who's now maintaining this data. And our goal is to basically say open source. Like we will provide the product where you don't have to do a side project to get this data. To sign up to us, we have like a very generous free tier. So the majority of what you're looking at, you can get for free. And then folks who are like at the higher enterprise level who need like thousands worth of repos or contributors worth of data, like those are folks who then will be charged.
Yeah. So if you're listening and you're looking to get serious with your open source project, I think you should sign up on open source right away. I have a link in the comments. You could check it out. We're coming up to the hour now. I know you have to run, Brian, but thank you so much for coming on this episode. Personally, I've learned a lot, and I hope anyone else that's listening, they definitely did pick up a couple of things. I have like tons of questions, but we'll probably have those in like a follow-up session. In the future.
Always happy to come back and chat.
Yeah. Anyways, thank you so much, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of the day.
All right. See you.